The proceeding will start shortly.
Order. Holly Lynch to move the motion.
Thank you very much. I beg to move that this House has considered the provision of cavity wall insulation under government grants. Can I start by thanking you, Mrs Latham, for joining us to chair this important debate this afternoon, and what a pleasure it is to see you. The problem I'm going to outline today all starts with government grants for cavity wall insulation schemes, but I wish it ended there. Sadly, it doesn't. I want to start by saying that I am grateful to the Minister for her time last week, as I had the opportunity to brief her on the scale and nature of the problem, which I can only describe as a scandal upon a scandal. I also want to thank the Yorkshire Post, God's own newspaper, the editor James Mitchinson and Deputy Business Editor Greg Wright, who recognised the agony of ordinary people in what is a complicated legal mess and have worked hard to unravel it and tell those stories. I'm truly grateful to them for their diligence and painstaking work shining a spotlight on this situation. I'm working with 20 constituents in my Halifax constituency who have all been affected. However, figures quoted by the BBC claim that up to 1,400 people may have been impacted. More and more MPs are taking to the chamber and writing to government ministers with their concerns and with their local cases. Most of the cases I'm working on follow a similar pattern. People had a knock on the door around 2015-2016 and were asked if they would like cavity wall insulation. They were assured that it wouldn't cost them a penny because it was a government-funded scheme. They were told it would be better for the environment and help them reduce their energy bills, saving them money. Most of the people who had the knock on the door were eligible for the scheme on the basis that they were in receipt of some form of welfare support, and so the prospect of saving money on energy bills was an attractive one. Yet months and years later, mould and damp started to affect properties where it had never been an issue before. In some cases, I've seen families become really quite unwell living in these conditions, and they couldn't understand what had changed so drastically in their homes. Years later, people had a second knock on the door from representatives of law firms, often telling them that they shouldn't have had cavity wall insulation in the first place, that it's done damage to their homes which would cost thousands to fix, and if they wanted it resolved, they should allow the law firm to take the insulators, many of which had since disappeared, to court on a no-win, no-fee basis. These cases were taken on by SSB Law, who engaged in correspondence with my constituents for some time, until just before Christmas of last year, these families and individuals had enforcement notices telling them they owed thousands of pounds in legal fees, and if they did not pay them, bailiffs would be coming to their homes. One bill was for £18,000, one was for £32,000, and a range of amounts in between and beyond. Now, bearing in mind that people were usually eligible for the government-funded schemes on the basis that they're in receipt of some form of welfare support, these bills have devastated people who simply have no means of paying them. And it's hard to overstate the impact that this has had on people's lives. One of my constituents, Mr Zafar, featured in the Yorkshire Post's extensive coverage. Mr Zafar's home was visited by a representative from a law firm in 2019. His wife was told that cavity wall insulation, which had been installed a few years earlier, was unlawful and potentially harmful to his children's health. This representative persuaded Mr Zafar that they should take on the case on a no-win, no-fee basis. The case was subsequently transferred to SSB Law solicitors, who handled the case for nearly 2 years. Then on the 30th of January 2023, Mr Zafar received the first enforcement letter demanding £2,973. He contacted SSB Law solicitors and was assured via email that the payment had been made to the High Court bailiff. Despite this assurance, on November the 28th, 2023, he received another enforcement letter, this time for nearly £19,000. Distressed by this demand, he made inquiries and learned that SSB law solicitors had gone into administration. He contacted Leeds High Court requesting the suspension of the enforcement order. However, just a few days before Christmas last year, an enforcement agent visited his home whilst he was at work, leaving his wife terrified. Mr. Zafar said, "I can't work properly and me and my wife cannot sleep. The amount in the enforcement notice is always on my mind. Wherever I go, I have on my mind the fact that I must find £19,000. He said, "My kids ask me, 'Dad, have you done anything wrong? Why are you paying this amount? And are we going to end up homeless?" Mr. Safar said, "I just want to release my family from this stressful and horrible situation." Another Halifax constituent, Mrs. Batty, was told cavity wall insulation would make her home more energy efficient, more environmentally friendly and improve heating costs, which, as we all know, if done properly, is all correct. However, in the following months, she started to notice damp and mould appearing in her front and back bedrooms, not a problem she had ever had before. Then in 2020, someone knocked on Mrs. Batty's door and asked whether there was any damp in the property. This man then told her that the cavity wall insulation should never have been installed in the first place, and this had now caused extensive issues at her property, stressing that it would be very difficult and expensive for her to rectify, which she could not afford. She says he advised me to submit a claim for damage done to the property through a no-win, no-fee claim. I was assured I would not have to pay anything, and this was the best way to rectify the problem. Over the next 4 years, Mrs. Batty received correspondence from SSB Law in relation to her case. But like the others, just before Christmas last year, she received a letter from the High Court enforcement informing her that she was liable to pay £32,000 to the defendant's solicitor. Mrs. Batty lives alone and works for the NHS on what she describes as a modest salary. She said, "I have no means to pay this money and I'm worried about bailiffs coming to my house and getting a CCJ or a charging order on my property." Another constituent who doesn't want to be named said that after she had cavity wall insulation fitted, work she had confidence in on the basis that it was funded under a government scheme. In the months that followed, both she and her young son contracted pneumonia, living in a house with mould and damp, again not a problem they had ever had before. She said, "I kept changing my wallpaper and house decorations to try and cover the mould." She told us, "Because SSB Law was a big company, I believed they were definitely going to help us." On the 5th of December 2023, she came home to find an enforcement letter at the back of the door. It said she must pay more than £17,000, otherwise bailiffs would be dispatched to her home. She said, "It was just so shocking. My entire credit history had been damaged. My credit card has been suspended. For 10 days, I couldn't sleep. I borrowed some money. I thought about selling my jewellery. It's really hard for me. Every day I'm thinking, how am I going to be able to pay this money back? It's affected my mortgage and affected my credit history. It's affected my daily life." This lady was so terrified that she managed to borrow money to pay the debt she had no idea she was liable for, just to alleviate her fear of bailiffs coming to her home, but she now worries every day how she will pay that loan back. Mr. Goody, another constituent with a similar story, said the amount of stress that is put on myself and my family through is grossly unfair. I've since learned that the construction and age of my property means it is unsuitable for expanding foam cavity filling and should never have been used in the first place. I'm a widowed 65-year-old who's due to retire this year with an 18-year-old son who will inherit the house eventually. I do not want him to inherit this problem. The Minister will see what a profound, life-changing impact this scandal has had on people and is continuing to have. Now, the Solicitors Regulation Authority is investigating SSB Law, which is welcome. In a letter to me from the 23rd of February, they confirmed, "We are currently investigating to see if SSB Group acted in accordance with our standards and regulations. This will include whether the firm properly assessed the merits of claims, whether constituents were properly advised at the outset on potential liabilities arising from initiating litigation, even if this was on the basis of a no-win, no-fee agreement. They said we'll also be looking at the handling of the files and the arrangements for after-the-event insurance, the failure of which appears to be the main reason why your constituents are facing the prospect of demands for costs. So crucially, and I really welcome this, the letter from the Chief Exec of the SRA states, after the event insurance has been around for several years and is frequently used in no-win, no-fee agreements. We are not aware of similar circumstances to those your constituents now face being experienced on this scale before. As such, we will also be speaking to a number of organisations to explore whether the numbers of cases where the failure of after-the-event insurance is increasing, or whether there are any wider gaps in protection to consumers that need to be addressed, given the importance of such products to individuals pursuing civil redress. So whilst I really welcome this investigation, which I hope will be comprehensive and assessing what has gone so horribly wrong for so many people, the SRA advised that their investigation is expected to report in the autumn. So whilst they've had some success in managing to get some of the enforcement notices paused, they hang over constituents like the sword of Damocles. So I ask the Minister to help move this to a more permanent resolution. As I acknowledged at the start of my contribution, this all starts with cavity wall insulation, but I'm acutely aware that this scandal has grown tentacles into a number of different government departments and policy areas. So my first ask of the Minister is that she makes representations to her colleagues to see what else can be done to hold the insurers and law firms involved to account. I'm afraid to say the responses from ministers at the Department of Justice so far have been less than useless. The SRA investigation is significant, and I'm hopeful that it will expose what has failed so badly, and I would urge the SRA to consider making recommendations to government and the other relevant agencies with a view to fixing whatever its findings deem to be so broken as to have had this impact upon 1,400 people. I would ask the Minister to liaise with the SRA to provide any support that she can, so that if there is any way the investigation could be accelerated, then that is made a reality. Given that the SRA may not be the right body to investigate why the after-the-event insurers have failed in this scenario, I hope the Minister will also consider ways in which any further regulators or agencies could be instructed to investigate and made to understand the scale, the seriousness and the urgency of this situation. Returning to the Minister's brief, I have to some extent been reassured that oversight and regulation of cavity wall insulation, which is such a good thing when done well, has improved since the Eco 1 and Eco 2 schemes, having discussed this in some detail with experts. However, there are still so many people out there who do not know where to turn with problems with cavity wall insulation dating back to that period, and that is a problem that has been exploited by some of these agencies, leading to the problems that we have now. SEGA, the Cavity Insulation Guarantee Agency, issue guarantees for cavity wall insulation and have issued almost 2.6 million since 1995. They operate a scheme that puts right failures in materials or workmanship for a period of 25 years from the date of installation. And many of my affected constituents could have explored this as a first step in seeking advice and redress. SEGA, in their correspondence to me, stressed that often homeowners were actively told not to lodge a claim with the guarantee provider, who could take action to correct the problem under guarantee, instead making, in these cases, false promises of a payout in court. One of the questions I had about those with cavity wall insulation who received a knock on the door from someone representing a law firm is where did they get their intelligence from about where to knock? SEGA suggests that the claims solicitor model relied upon farming a large number of potential claims using data accessed either through Freedom of Information requests, through Ofgem, or under the guise of the Data Protection Act in an attempt to access their own guarantee records. Then, having gained information on properties which had been installed, unqualified assessors were sent out to encourage the homeowner to pursue a claim, and in most cases inflated any potential damage, or indeed alleging damage that simply did not exist, with the subsequent report being signed off by unscrupulous RICS registered chartered surveyors. So the minister can see just how much this all stinks. So I ask her to undertake a review into the whole sorry mess. It is a scandal upon a scandal which has seen these vulnerable people, up to 1,400 of them, have, in some cases, chronic problems with damp and mould in their homes as a consequence of a government-funded scheme, to be then preyed upon by unscrupulous assessors and lawyers, to then fall through the cracks of regulation and mismanagement to find the people who can least afford it and least deserve it are picking up the bill for it, driving them into debt and despair. I look forward to the Minister's response.
Is that this House has considered the provision of cavity wall insulation under government grants. Jim Shannon.
Madam Chair, it's indeed a pleasure to speak in this debate and to serve under your chairship as well. And also, can I, first of all, thank the Honourable Lady for Halifax for leading the debate. I know that things are different in Northern Ireland. It's not the Minister's responsibility to reply for Northern Ireland. That's a different scheme. It's not the same. But I wanted to come along and support the Honourable Lady in her request for justice, because that's ultimately what the Honourable Lady is looking for. She's looking for that justice for her constituents, and others who will speak after me will be seeking justice as well for the scheme. A scheme for England, Scotland and Wales is what this scheme is. The scheme for Northern Ireland is a different scheme. But I obviously want to come along and support the Honourable Lady. In my research for before they come to speak today, Madam Chair, when you read the background information, and even today to listen to the Honourable Lady's comments and the despair that some people feel, the Honourable Lady referred to one lady who was only able to sleep for 10 nights. But such was the trauma and the concern that she had. And that level of concern financially, ultimately, and presented with a bill of some 25 and 17,000 was one of the figures, and 35,000 was the other figure, I think indicates just how worrying that can be, because you can't understand why you're at this position, because that wasn't what you signed up for. So the Honourable Lady is right to set the scene. And her comments today on the financial ruin her constituents have faced in terms of unexpected legal bills running into tens of thousands of pounds. There is no doubt more needs to be done to support these families, and furthermore to protect them from schemes such as these in the future. So it's not only about helping people today with the problems that they have, it's also, Madam Chair, about making sure that these things don't happen in the future. I think, Madam Chair, that there must be something wrong with the plumbing. Yeah. There's definitely there's a background noise, whatever that may be, and I'm sure it won't silence me in making my comments or silence anybody else, Madam Chair. And it's so important that all constituents have good access to thermal insulation that will prevent heat loss in their homes. And I'm going to give some examples about the heat loss cavity wall insulation schemes that we have in Northern Ireland, where we were able to sort the problems out, by the way, and didn't have individual companies soliciting around the doors with a no-win, no-fee commendation. There's no doubt, however, that this process is expensive. For many, there will be struggles to pay for this. It is fantastic, and it's always incredible, and government need to be commended for what they do for the schemes to try and enable people to upgrade their homes and to ensure that they do have the level of insulation and the level of heating that they all need. The schemes are offered across the United Kingdom to ensure those on low income can avail of cavity wall insulation schemes. I know these are all different across the United Kingdom, as I intimated at the beginning, Madam Chair. For example, First beginning in 2013, Government's Energy Company Obligation, the ECO scheme, required large energy suppliers to pay for energy savings measures in British households that meet certain conditions covering wall and loft insulation. We have a different scheme back home, and we have a cavity wall insulation. We also have a roof insulation schemes, and those schemes are offered through the Housing Executive and sometimes through local councils as well. This scheme, the ECO scheme, covers England, Scotland and Wales. In Northern Ireland, it's no surprise that we have differing circumstances. We often do. We have a scheme that seems to be working well, and whenever there are indiscretions, whenever things do not fall into place, then we're quite able, so far anyway, to be able to come up with solutions. Northern Ireland has what they refer to the Sustainable Energy Programme, set up by the utility regulator. Most of this funding, 80%, has been targeted at vulnerable customers, perhaps older customers or those in low income. It's really important, Madam Chair, that we are able to help those who are vulnerable. We can help the elderly people, we can help those in low incomes, to enable them to have their houses brought up to a standard where they can avail of the same energy savings and efficiencies, and also at the same time some of the cavity wall and roof insulation that are also helpful. So it is great, as it means that those who are the most in need of assistance are getting to it. I deal every week, Madam Chair, in my office with those who apply for the cavity wall insulation scheme that we have in Northern Ireland, the Sustainable Energy Programme. We've been successful in enabling people to get on that scheme. We do just wish that there's a wee bit more financial aid available, but now that the Assembly's back again, the responsibility will fall on the shoulders of the Northern Ireland Assembly and to the department in the Assembly that looks after. So when we have those in place, in my constituency of Strangford and my main town of Newtownards, many of the homes are of a certain age and standard, and what they do need is the cavity wall insulation schemes. The Housing Executive, who are the major provider of homes, although the Housing Association provide homes now, some of those homes are old as well. And we've had in the past some cavity wall insulation schemes where, I have to say, examples where cavity wall insulation wasn't even put into the walls, although it was said that it was. And then we have cavity wall insulation in some of the walls where it's having a detrimental effect. I have to say, similar to what the Honourable Lady is referring to. So I'm not quite sure what the reason for that is, but we've been able to sort those things out, ultimately because the companies involved have an obligation to deliver what is right and what is proper. So the priority is about ensuring that government properly back these schemes to ensure that they have been done legitimately, and constituents like those in Halifax, the Honourable Lady's constituency, are not being lumped with thousands of pounds of fees to pay back. There certainly must be justice for those who were victims to this scheme. And I'm pleased that since this, that many have already contacted the Legal Ombudsman, I understand, and the Financial Services Ombudsman to question the level of service that was provided. And I think when it gets to that stage of an Ombudsman, that you're hoping to have recourse and justice and restitution and ultimately compensation for those people who have been part of that process. So again, in conclusion, Madam Chair, I thank the Honourable Lady for leading today's debate on this issue, and she should know she has my full support in this matter, and she has the support of all of us in this room, because that's why we're here today. And I'm hoping that the Minister and obviously our colleague, the Shadow Minister, will be in a position to offer some support and perhaps maybe answer some of the questions that the Honourable Lady has posed. There is no doubt in my mind, Madam Chair, that government must now step in to right those wrongs and ensure they are protected financially. I believe that's the obligation. That's why we're here. I'm here to support the Honourable Lady, and also here to support the Honourable Lady's constituents and those other ones from within this chamber who will speak shortly, who also want the same justice as well. Madam Chair, thank you.
Sorry for the background noise that is buzzing that you can hear, and the doorkeepers have contacted the engineers and they're going to see if they can address the issue. But meanwhile, if people could speak up, because it's quite difficult to hear. I can't hear from here what's being said, so if people can speak up so everybody can hear. Kate Holland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's an honour to serve under your chairmanship. Can you hear me? I'd like to congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Halifax, for securing this very important debate. And I'm pleased, as the Honourable Member said previously, that we've got cross-party support and shared concerns on this shocking situation. And I think this is a real opportunity to seek clarity and pursue justice for all of our constituents who have been affected by this shocking affair. The human toll of the SSB law crisis is significant and has undoubtedly caused considerable shock, anger and distress to those affected. I've personally met with multiple constituents over the last few weeks to discuss the impact of the collapse of SSB law, and I've heard firsthand how the devastating situation has severely impacted them, their loved ones, their lives, and I've seen the damage to their homes, which is absolutely shocking considering the government spent millions of pounds on this scheme, leaving families in these terrible situations. But the situation goes on for them because they are receiving threatening letters of court action. Several of my constituents are in real fear of losing their homes, and it's shameful and outrageous that people have been misled like this, and I think we need to demand justice for those who have been targeted. My honourable friend member from Halifax mentioned the data on who was affected by this scheme must have been shared, and that must be investigated. Because I'm one of 20 MPs who have signed an EDM 423, which calls on the government to ensure that all demands for payment in court orders resulting from the collapse of SSB law are dropped immediately. We need to take pressure off these families. It is significant that this situation has arisen from the poor implementation of a government-backed decarbonisation scheme, and as such, the government must be held accountable for the crisis that ensued. The failure on the part of the government to ensure the proper implementation of the insulation schemes means we must now firmly commit to upholding the rights and protecting the well-being of citizens. Because meanwhile, people are living in unsafe homes with damp and mould threatening their lives, their physical and mental health. If we're not forceful and succinct in our approach to solving the crisis, we could see the development of potential life-threatening and serious health issues. One mother told me the story of her little boy who's suffering severely with asthma, and she's really concerned about him. But it is vital that we work cross-party to ascertain the true scale of this crisis and find a solution for affected constituents as the scope of this problem continues to come to light, and I'm sure it will continue to grow. We must urgently work with those affected to put the failings of SSB law to right and to address this extraordinary scandal. I would implore the government ministers to meet with victims of this crisis, hear their stories, as I have done, so that they're able to fully comprehend the urgency of the situation. It's incumbent on the government to address this unacceptable and desperate situation that so many find themselves in through no fault of their own. I will continue to do whatever I can in this House to pursue justice, and I'm pleased to learn that the Minister has the same ambitions as myself and my colleagues, because this situation cannot continue and there needs to be measures put in place to ensure it never happens again.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mrs. Layton, and it is a privilege to serve with you in the chair. And I should also pay tribute to the Honourable Member for Halifax for securing this debate and for telling us about some of the experiences of her constituents, some of the problems that they've had after having cavity wall insulation fitted to their homes, and some of the problems that I would suggest perhaps arise from very poor ventilation that might have been a consequence. And it's very troubling to hear about that, and I would agree that I've come across on the doorstep constituents who have been suffering from mould and damp And I've also talked to an employee of East Devon District Council who is responsible for the maintenance of social homes in that district council area, who has said to me that some of the issues around damp and mould are indeed linked to cavity wall insulation. But I think what we shouldn't take away from in this debate is that done properly, cavity wall insulation is a very positive thing. And I want to set that out in terms of it being positive for keeping people warm, for saving money for government, for the taxpayers, and for individuals, and also for reducing emissions. So it's one of those rare policy areas that is not just a win-win, but is in fact a win-win-win. On the subject of heating, the End Fuel Poverty Coalition estimated that 4,950 people died in the winter between 2022 and 2023 because they were living in cold conditions in this country. And clearly that is something that has worried all of us, and I know that the government was also concerned about it because it introduced the energy price guarantee. Now, on the face of it, the energy price guarantee was a very popular policy because it involved reducing people's energy bills by a very significant amount, although actually many of my constituents won't have felt it because their energy bills were still staggeringly high in that winter 2022 to 23. But the energy price guarantee was a subsidy by the government, by the taxpayer, of £37 billion. And the really sad thing is that had the government continued to invest in home insulation measures at the rate that it had been doing so in 2012, then a very large proportion of that funding would not have been necessary that was then spent on heating people's homes and subsidising the heating of people's homes. And lastly, the third win is, of course, reducing emissions. And with concerns that the government may not reach its target around net zero by 2050, with concerns that the world may not meet the target of reducing the temperature rises by 1.5 degrees, then we have absolutely to be concerned about reducing emissions too. So that's heating homes, saving money and reducing emissions, all things that can be achieved with cavity wall insulation done properly. I want to move now to looking back at the last decade or so and how much cavity wall insulation has helped some of our constituents. 1 million cavity wall insulations were carried out in Great Britain through the Energy Company Obligation, the ECO scheme, between 2013 and 2023. And this was 27% of all measures carried out under the scheme. The annual number of cavity wall insulations provided through ECO has fallen over time, from a peak when the Liberal Democrats were in government in 2014 of over 316,000 to a low of a little more than 11,000 last year. The number of eco measures overall installed peaked at 750,000 in 2014, but fell to just 159,700 in 2022, a fall of almost 80%, and a figure which was 59% lower than in 2021. There's no evidence that the UK is near the saturation point for cavity wall insulation. The government has estimated that 71% of homes with cavity walls had insulation installed at the end of 2022. And 3.8 million homes with uninsulated cavity walls were thought to be easy to treat. The remaining 1.3 million were hard to treat. So there is still very much low-hanging fruit to progress with now that we know how cavity wall insulation can be done and done well. If we sort of think not just about Great Britain as a whole, but about England, England has a lower percentage of cavity wall insulation, with just 69% of homes having it, compared to 76% in Wales and 80% in Scotland. In my region, the West Country, the South West got just 6% of all eco measures spending, compared to 18% for the North West. So clearly, the West Country is dipping out again in this area. And again, the Liberal Democrats in government was making sure that home insulation was a real priority for us, given the savings on heating, money and emissions. We made sure in 2012 that 2.3 million homes were benefiting in a single year. If the Conservatives had carried on insulating at that level, the average household would have saved hundreds of pounds per year on their energy bills, as well as the taxpayer having saved money too during that crisis following the invasion of Ukraine. It's reckoned that the failure cost taxpayers around £9 billion under the energy price guarantee for the lack of insulated homes. To finish on a more cheery note, there is some really good work happening in local areas. In my constituency, the Blackdown Hills Partnerships Network has invested in an infrared camera, a thermal imaging camera that it offers up to residents so that they can identify where their homes are leaking heat. And they've lent this to Sidmouth Town Council, that is now offering, the chair of the Sidmouth Town Council, Chris Lockyer, is offering to help residents to save not just heat, but money. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Latham. It is, of course, a pleasure to serve with you in the chair. And can I also join colleagues in thanking my honourable friend for Halifax for bringing this very important debate here today. And she quite rightly points out the importance, as does my honourable friend for Blackburn and other honourable members here. The importance of this debate, Madam Chairman, is very important to many of our constituents who are suffering the result of some of the scandalous actions that we've heard about today, and has meant that many of them are being caused real sleepless nights at the moment and threatened with financial ruin. And I'll come on to that a little later. But like other honourable members have said, with the promise of reducing the energy bills and with the government stamp of approval, cavity wall insulation schemes were an attractive proposition readily signed up by many of my constituents also in Bradford East. But in a far cry from the promise of warmer homes and lower bills, cavity wall insulation has now left many of them facing financial ruin, as after it was installed, as has been said by many honourable members, they began to notice damp and black mould growing on walls, ceilings, window ledges, floors in their homes. Their electrical systems were compromised. Their homes became harder to heat, and actually, in some cases, it caused an increase in skin conditions and actually the mental stress that it caused many of them in constantly dealing with this problem. And it's important to mention the real-life consequences on our constituents. The cavity wall insulation that was supposed to keep their homes warm was instead acting as a bridge, drawing the moisture from the external walls and transferring it inside their homes. And whilst it was an excellent way to improve energy efficiency in many homes, which it is if it's correctly installed and done in the right way. So tragically, in those cases, it was discovered that those homes were never suitable for cavity wall insulation, or the workmanship that had been carried out was defective. Now, what's alarming is many of the cases, and I've got, like other honourable members, tens of cases now, people who are being forced to pay hundreds of thousands of pounds in the total accumulated amount of the cases just I have in terms of the legal fees, which I'll come on to. But the companies that initially installed, in every one of these cases, initially installed the cavity wall insulation disappeared. And they had nobody to go back to ask, any... So literally, they were left on their own. And that's where the next serious issue arose for them. Because when they then had legal firms going around door to door promising no win, no fee, it was the only option Madam Chairman, that was available to sometimes people who had very, very limited means and have already gone through the stress. Now, one such company was SSB Law, as has been mentioned and as actually has now been highlighted by a documentary in Parliament. I've raised it, other colleagues have raised it, and SSB Law actually took on 200 million in debts trying to deal with these cases. Many of these cases actually which they knew probably had never had any chances of success, but they were taken on, and many victims in Bradford, as we've heard. Now, my constituents were pursuing financial reparations for damage caused by defective insulation, and there was no fault on their part for the situation they found themselves in, but they're now facing demands for payments that stretch into, like I've said, tens of thousands of pounds, which are simply unaffordable. And yet, despite the situation for many of my constituents in Bradford growing more and more desperate, it's clear that no one in the current system has any inclination towards delivering them justice, and it's therefore equally clear the government need to step in and intervene. Now, the government, this matter has actually been, and I know there's, in the spirit of the cross-party support for this, but this is not something that's never, ever been raised. You know, there's been reviews of this, certainly even according to my research, as far back as 2015, when it was acknowledged by at least one report, if not more than that, that there is an issue with some of the work around cavity wall insulations and the level at which it's being carried out. Certainly in terms of parliamentary questions, debates, the matter has been raised a number of times in 2016 and 17. So I think this is a real, again, given the cross-party support for this, our constituents are now begging out. You know, I cannot emphasise some of the conversations my colleagues here and others who tragically are not here today because it's a one-line whip, and I think it was a sudden debate that my colleague, only my colleague from Halifax could have pulled off miraculously as quick as she did. So many more would have been here today. But I think we're really here to plead that this is causing anxiety, stress, depression. You know, I've had people who haven't slept for days worrying. You know, when you're a pensioner and suddenly you receive, and the only thing you have is your house, and you are already living in what is one of the biggest cost of living crises and making ends meet, and suddenly you get a demand for £28,000 through the door, that is going to cause you untold misery, Madam Chairman. Of course it is. And therefore the government has a real opportunity here. And the point's been made earlier. The SRA knew about this. There was a complaint that went in, certainly with regards to SSB Law, way before many of these cases had advanced to a stage where now they are being asked to repay. The insurance company responsible is now not agreeing to pay any, you know, the indemnity insurance, that is the, if you like, the protection, the legal protection, is now saying, and I'm not going to go into further detail because I suspect this is a matter that will be subject to much legal debate when the time comes. So I'm going to respectfully ask the Minister, in the spirit of you know, the whole House agreeing to this, a cross-party approach, to really step in. And I will say, you know, I've wrote to the Justice Minister about this in that same spirit over a month ago, and I've yet to receive a response, which, frankly, you know, something like this, and all I've requested is a meeting for MPs to sit down and discuss this issue, because I think we have a duty to protect those constituents that have been wronged. So just three asks of the Minister. Firstly, to ensure that the legal proceedings, costs and demands for payment that our constituents are mired in, along with the charging orders, interest charges and threats of home repossession, are dropped immediately. Now, I think the government can step in to address these, to take some action towards that. I appreciate the legal technicalities around it. Secondly, the government must conduct a full review of all government-funded insulation schemes to identify the total number of homes affected by defective cavity wall insulation, as well as a full investigation into the collapse of SSB law and the role of regulators in guarding against risks. And thirdly, the government must convene a meeting between ministers, energy providers, insulation companies, legal firms and anyone else involved in this scandal to agree steps forward, towards a compensation fund, such as the one developed for the Fishwick insulation scandal, which was not completely the same as this. That involved insulation of a different type, but there was compensation there. There was a precedent set there, where defective cavity wall insulation from the homes address the structural damage and retrofit them with good quality, suitable insulation with a 25-year warranty. That's what happened in that case. So again, I thank my honourable friend for Halifax. I think I'm absolutely right in saying that thousands of our constituents up and down the country will very much be grateful to her for securing this very important debate. This is one of those areas where I cannot press enough how important this is to our constituents. We can save any further misery. We have an absolute duty to do that, and I really look forward to working with ministers on this to address and end this scandal for many of our constituents.
Well, thank you, Mrs. Latham. And congratulations, I think, before we go any further, to the Honourable Member for Halifax for securing this very important debate this afternoon, and indeed not only for securing the debate, but actually conducting the detailed case that needs to be put forward about this particular scandal in such an exemplary way. And indeed, I would add to that the contributions of honourable members across the Chamber today who have added to that exemplary presentation with their own additions, but underlining the urgent need to do something about this over the next period. The honourable member for Blackburn, the honourable member for Bradford, and the honourable member for Honiton and Tiverton, and of course the honourable member for Strangford, all contributed first-class contributions to this debate this afternoon. What I think we need to say before we go any further is that cavity wall insulation itself has played and will play a tremendous role in keeping people's homes warm, reducing their bills, fighting fuel poverty, and uprating homes so that they are fit for a low carbon future. And indeed, not only that, that the vast majority of cavity wall insulations work perfectly well and do a very good job for the homes in which they are fitted. But of course, those cavity wall installations need to be done with the right materials, by the right people, in the right places, and according to the right standards. And there certainly are circumstances, and I regret to say rather more circumstances in the early days of cavity wall insulation than is the case at the moment, where those criteria were not adhered to and problems arose with properties in which cavity wall insulation had been placed. Now, one would think in a reasonable world that where those problems arise, I'm so sorry, Mr. Latham. Yes, of course I should. Where those problems arise, it should be the case that there should be a speedy recognition that the problem has arisen, and an equally speedy arrangement whereby the person in whose home the problem has arisen can get restitution for what has happened, both in terms of compensation and in terms of the putting right what has gone wrong with that cavity wall insulation in the first place. And of course, from 1995, the Cavity Insulation Guarantee Agency came into place, which does, as honourable members have mentioned this afternoon, provide guarantees for cavity wall insulation, 6 million of them, I think, since they have been set up, over a 25-year period, and indeed has a good record of making sure that redress is carried out in a speedy manner, properly, where problems have arisen. But unfortunately, firstly, not everybody knows about this agency or has had their wall insulations guaranteed through CIGA, or indeed sometimes had cavity wall insulation before those things came into place. So the picture today is quite good as far as guarantees are concerned, but that doesn't remotely address the problem that has been brought before us this afternoon, because as the Honourable Member for Halifax herself said, this is essentially a scandal on the scandal. And that is the problem of cavity wall insulation going wrong in a certain area. And by the way, where cavity wall insulation does go wrong, it is quite often the case that a number of cases appear in certain areas because the installer... Yes, I'm sorry, I keep doing that. The appearance of a number of problems in particular areas may relate to a particular company carrying out a number of faulty installations or using the wrong material in a particular area, whereas in other areas there will be no such events occurring. So, scandal one is that clearly in a particular part of the country, a relatively high number of such deficient cavity wall insulation arrangements did indeed come to light. But scandal two was that essentially a parasitic law firm decided that they would make a particularly good living by zealously pursuing people who they thought might conceivably have a claim for failed cavity wall insulation, and trying to push those people down a particular path as far as what they thought was restitution is concerned, in a wholly cynical and unacceptable manner. And indeed, I am pleased to hear from the Honourable Member for Halifax that the Solicitors Regulation Authority is pursuing the investigation of this particular company, SSB Law, but it doesn't actually wholly come to terms with the fact that it is not just SSAB Law, which is a company that has pursued this kind of practice, but a number of other firms as well. And indeed, perhaps an irony of the present situation is SSB Law itself took over a number of claims from a company that had itself pursued this model and had gone bust in the process. So you might say it's a scandal upon a scandal upon a scandal. And the the way this worked was set out indeed by a letter from the Cavity Insulation Guarantee Agency to the Honourable Member for Halifax, which describes how the model operated as this. A claims lead generator, often unqualified, would promise large payouts if the homeowner would sign up to pursue a claim for failed cavity wall insulation. Details were then passed to an RACS surveyor who doesn't visit the property but prepares a claim schedule based on detail provided by the lead generator. The claim is handed to a claim solicitor and indeed SSB Law, as I mentioned, was a claim solicitor that took on a number of these cases, and indeed on another company operating this model, Pure Legal, having apparently had the opportunity to do so by the Solicitors Regulation Authority itself. The claim solicitor then sends a letter to the installer and informs them to put their insurer on notice that the claim will be in the order of £60,000 for damages caused by poorly installed insulation. The schedule of costs does not reflect the property and damage is often not evident. Homeowners are actively discouraged from notifying the guarantee provider, that is, in this instance, CIGA, and instead promised a large payout. And then just before the claim goes to court, the claim solicitor drops the compensation amount to just over £10,000. They do this to encourage the installer or insurer to pay out, and also so that they can still claim costs through the fast-track legal route. Costs are typically around £70,000 at this point. So that's the model, and that's a scandalous model. No one should be allowed to operate that kind of arrangement in this country, in this age, on the basis of solicitors' companies that are supposed to be protecting the interests of their clients and not just trying to make a living on parasiting on the distress and problems of cavity wall insulation problems that have arisen for householders. So the Solicitors Regulation Authority has, I think, a substantial job to do, not just investigating this particular company, but actually, I would hope to broaden this out to say, how can it be that solicitors are able to get away with this kind of arrangement in this kind of way, and then, as we've heard this afternoon, when that arrangement doesn't work out very well, go bust and leave all those householders facing those huge bills as they do. Now, I really think that in the circumstances here, if the government can pursue any form of intervention which can assist with those householders, firstly being protected from those claims that are coming back against them. And indeed, the claims that are coming back against them are in a number of instances from the installers who have been basically attacked by these particular law firms, have defended themselves. The law firms have then gone bust. They've put in a lot of money. And naturally they want some of their money back. So it is an almighty mess as far as who is really responsible for all this, although we do know that overwhelmingly the responsibility lies with the dodgy law firms who have pursued this kind of practice and have given false guarantees and false promises to householders in the process. So there does seem to me something to do with the Department of Justice as to getting them to look at what sort of practices make this sort of arrangement possible. But also, I think it is very important in terms of what I think we all want to see is confidence in cavity wall insulation for future programmes. And we differ between ourselves on the extent of those programmes for the future. And indeed, I might just add to the member for Honiton and Tiverton's suggestion that it was the Liberal Democrats in alliance with the government that really pursued cavity wall insulation at the particular time they did. that was true that they did, but actually it was based on the programmes that had arisen in the last Labour government under the certain CEST programmes, which carried on till about 2012-2013, produced an enormous number of generally very good cavity wall insulation programmes, which has crashed since that date. And we hope, certainly from our side, to revive those publicly funded and sorted out measures as far as retrofit are concerned under a future Labour government. But I think there is agreement on all sides that we want it to be seen by the general public that cavity wall insulation is a good thing for their homes and for them, and indeed will be a good service for the nation in terms of making our homes warmer and more livable across the board. So it's important that everyone has confidence that that system is going to work as well as it should be, and if it doesn't work as well as it should do, that there is proper redress going on. So I would ask the Minister to pursue seriously whatever can be done to seek some additional redress for the householders who find themselves in this difficult situation, but also to make sure that perhaps working in conjunction with the existing guarantee agencies that there are at the moment, to ensure that for the future we have the best level of protection that the public can get as far as cavity wall insulation when it goes wrong is concerned, but a guarantee that under most circumstances those people undertaking cavity wall insulation can rest easy that their cavity wall insulation should work rightly for them, but if it doesn't, they needn't worry because help will be at hand to put it right.
Thank you, Mrs. Latham, and it's the greatest of pleasure to serve here, be here and do your chairmanship. And let me first of all start by thanking the Honourable Member for Halifax for raising this incredibly important debate, and also for all of the Honourable Members who have partaken in this debate with some very heart-moving stories. It's a dreadful situation for consumers to be in, and I just want to convey that I have every sympathy for the people who have been affected by this. And the points that have been made today have been incredibly well made by all members who have spoken, as we need to remember that the impact that this has on people's lives, and that has been portrayed very, very clearly. As the Honourable Member for Tiverton and Honiton and the Honourable Member for Southampton Test has stated, insulating homes properly is one of the most impactful and cost-effective things that we can do, which is why we have a number of schemes ongoing to install cavity wall insulation. As the Honourable Member for Halifax has said, the Solicitors Regulation Authority is already working with the Financial Conduct Authority and the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors looking into the conduct of the firm in question. But these are independent bodies of the government, and it would be inappropriate for my department or the Ministry of Justice to intervene. The Ministry of Justice, as the department responsible for legal services regulation, will continue to closely engage with the SRA and Legal Services Board to understand the action being taken and the timeframes for investigation. However, I am concerned to hear from the Honourable Member for Halifax and the Honourable Member for Blackburn about how companies such as SSEB Law may have targeted these people. And we will ask the SRA to consider how SSB Law were able to target these people as part of their ongoing investigation. And I also acknowledge the points raised by the Honourable Member for Bradford East and the Honourable Member for Southampton Test on this subject. Also, I don't want to see this as an issue being passed around like a football, because the point is being made that this is an urgent matter for the households impacted. And so I give my guarantee today that I will be writing to the Ministry of Justice on this matter, asking them to encourage the SRA to accelerate the investigation for homeowners affected, as they deserve to have this addressed swiftly. Of course I will.
I'm very grateful to the Minister. While she's writing to the Ministry of Justice, and she may, one assumes, speak to her colleague in the Ministry of Justice, can she also kindly request that he respond or she respond to the letters from MPs and organise an urgent meeting, please?
Yes. I'd like to thank my honourable member for the intervention, and of course I will pass those remarks on as well. I would also encourage members to write to the department about specific cases, as in the department that I serve under, and if there is a guarantee in place, my officials will engage with the guarantee agency to see if there's anything that we can do about that particular situation. The range of government-backed schemes to install cavity wall insulation are ongoing, and lessons have been learned from the complaints that we are discussing today. And these complaints have thankfully are not representative of the experiences of thousands who have used our existing schemes. Because, as I said earlier, there are, in certain circumstances and suitable properties, it is one of the most cost-effective measures for energy saving. So for a relatively small outlay in costs, we know that a cavity wall insulation, which costs between £1,000 and £3,000, it can save homeowners up to £300 a year. I also know the Honourable Member for Halifax is already aware that the government has made improvements on the installation standards as a result of the findings earlier. But I'll just summarise these changes we have made, because any response to this problem must include preventing it from happening again. And that is why the energy efficient measures installed under all current government schemes must be in line with industry best standards established by the British Standards Institution. And now all installers must be certified to the publicly available specification of 2030 standards for any energy efficiency measure they are carrying out, including cavity wall insulation, demonstrating a high level of competence. And the latest revision of the standards were published at the end of September 2023. And so I can assure honourable members that this is a live issue for us and that we are continuing to refine and improve this. The department published guidance in October 2019 for consumers who suspect they may have faulty cavity wall installation installed in their homes to assist consumers. And we would urge all consumers to follow the guidance to help them avoid being victims of the fraudulent cavity wall insulation claims. And outside of government-funded schemes, I would urge all consumers to check the certificate claimed by their installer and what protections or warranties installers can offer before going ahead with their work. Trustmark are the government-endorsed quality mark to retrofit. To their find an installer web search will be a good place to start for any consumer, whether work is government-funded or not. As a Minister for Affordability and Skills, I'm glad we're discussing this today because I think there is a double injustice here. People who did the right thing by wanting to install insulation to lower their energy use have suffered, and the insulation that has failed. This really emphasises why we are now required to use the PAS certificate and Trustmark register installed in government schemes. And now a legal firm that was recuperating these costs has collapsed, leaving affected households wondering how this will be resolved. And this is why I'm so grateful to the Honourable Member for Halifax for bringing in cases in her constituency to my attention, and all the Honourable Members who have brought their constituents to my attention. And I would encourage all other members who aren't able to attend today to write to the Department about specific cases. And my officials will, of course, follow up with the relevant guarantee agency to ensure that all due process has been followed.
Thank you very much again, Chair. Can I thank you once again for chairing so ably this important debate this afternoon. I do want to thank those honourable members who have contributed to this debate. Can I start with the honourable member for Strangford, who always, in such a diligent and dedicated fashion, is a voice and advocate for his constituents. He's always incredibly supportive of me and so many across this House, and we all appreciate his contributions in debates like this one today. Can I thank him for what he has said? Can I thank my honourable friend for Blackburn, who spoke so eloquently on behalf of her constituents, including that young boy who is struggling with asthma, and now his parents are battling both the debts and this battle to resolve those problems in their home, as well as take on some of these giants that they're up against that have boxed them into this incredibly desperate financial position. Can I thank her for what she has said? To the honourable member for Tiverton and Honiton, I mean, like the Shadow Minister, has set out the really strong case for cavity wall insulation when it is done so well, the really positive impact it can make on homes, on energy efficiency, on reducing energy costs. He described it as a win-win-win. You can see from honourable members who've outlined the impact that in this scenario has had for our constituents, that unfortunately it's ended up being a lose-lose-lose. I said it was a scandal upon a scandal. The Shadow Minister said it was a scandal upon a scandal upon a scandal. And I think he's absolutely got a point. So it's got to be done well, but this is where we've got to find a solution so we can give people back those assurances and confidence in cavity wall insulation by finding a way through this particular mess. But can I also thank my honourable friend for Bradford East, who characteristically explained both the emotional impact that this has had on his constituents and mine, whilst giving both a detailed assessment of how the cavity wall insulation has failed, and in some situations leading to an increase in skin conditions, shockingly, in the cases that he has been involved in. Can I thank him for his contribution? I am grateful to the Minister. I think she has understood today, in the cases that have been shared, the seriousness and the urgency for our constituents that we're here representing today. She has encouraged colleagues, members of Parliament, to write to her department. I'm sure we'll take her up on that offer. But I do ask her once again to make representations in the strongest possible terms to her colleagues in the Ministry of Justice. I did say I hadn't been really left with any confidence that they understood the seriousness of this issue. In response to me from the 22nd of February, really I just sort of get definitions of some of the bodies involved, ending with, at this stage, given that legal service regulators are independent of government and the SRA has ongoing investigations into this issue, it would not be appropriate for the MOJ to seek to intervene further. And really there is an underlining of that. I absolutely am sensitive to the separations between government and the legal system, but where, as the Shadow Minister so articulately outlined, there has been such a catastrophic failure, and he described these companies as operating in a parasitic way, these law firms, where there has been that failure, I am looking to the Ministry of Justice to explore all the different ways that it could appropriately intervene. Where these constituents are facing these legal bills, some have been paused. I don't know how long they've been paused for. I haven't got absolute clarity about why. If people are to live with this until the autumn, even as a best case scenario, if there is then a solution to resolve this and make this to go away for people, to expect them to live with this until the autumn is asking them to live in pretty desperate, distressing conditions that I know will drive them further into despair and debt and poverty. So I thank her for her time, and I just finish with that final plea. Please can she convey in the strongest possible terms to her colleagues in the Justice Department and the others why we really need government help on this. Thank you.
The question is, this House has considered the provision of cavity wall insulation under government grants. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. The sitting is suspended until 4 p.m. Order. I call Bob Seeley to move the motion, then I'll call the Minister to respond. There will not be an opportunity for the member in charge to wind up, as is the convention for 30-minute debates. Order. Order. Bob Seeley to move the motion.
Thank you very much indeed, Mrs Latham, and it is a pleasure as ever to serve under your chairmanship. I'm going to come straight to the point. For me, the relationship between the ferry firms and the people of the Isle of Wight is breaking down. The ferries are a genuine lifeline. We have no choice but to use them. There is no public service obligation to them. We need to get a better deal. I produced a study of the ferries, which is the first, I think, major work that's come out of the island for 40 years on the ferries. And in it, I highlight how we can get a better deal for the ferries, what some of the options for the firms are, and how we can get there. Because I know that time's tight, I'll move on and try to make as much progress, Mrs Latham, as quickly as possible. The island depends on three private ferry operators: Whitelink, Red Funnel and Hover Travel. Hover Travel is not really part of the picture here. Whitelink and Red Funnel are. Whitelink was privatised in 1984. Red Funnel has always been in private hands. While services initially improved throughout the 80s and 90s, they are now worsening with both firms, in part because of the private equity style ownership model, and I will return to that because it is a constant theme. Under New Labour in 2009, the ferries were given a clean bill of health, and we were told there was open competition between them. That wasn't true. In passenger services, there are, going from west to east on the island, two local monopolies in the west, between Yarmouth and Lymington and between Cowes and Southampton. The idea, and I'm delighted to see the Minister, my right honourable friend here, as ever, the idea that you're going to travel from Yarmouth, 25 miles to Ryde, to cross 4 miles of water into Portsmouth, to travel, 35, 40 miles round to Lymington again, is a nonsense. In Ryde, there is competition between Hover Travel and Whitelink, not to the same destination. One goes to Southsea, one goes to Portsmouth Harbour, but there's competition of sorts. On the car ferries, there is an effective monopoly in the West Wight, again on the Yarmouth to Lymington route, and a duopoly for the rest of the island, with Red Funnel pitched slightly below Whitelink's extortionate prices. But the idea that somehow there is a free market on the Isle of Wight ferries is not true. Barriers to entry are very, very high. And I am now trying to support two potential competitors into the market, passenger ferry and a potential car ferry, but it is difficult to do so because the ferry firms also own the current ports. Happy to do so.
Bringing this forward, a similar issue for me back home, except for one difference. We have a ferry connects my constituency of Portaferry with the constituency of Southdown, which is Strangford. It's all coming in, and the boundary changes will all be mine next time round if everything goes according to plan. But what we have done back home, we never privatised the ferries. We held it in the retention of the Department of Infrastructure because we felt that was the best idea. Does the honourable gentleman feel, when it's going to moving forward, does he feel that maybe government retention would be a better way forward?
It's always a pleasure to hear from my honourable friend, and that is absolutely one of the ideas that I'm going to discuss later in my speech, but I thank him. So what are the problems? First, as I've said, the ferry firms have no legal obligation to meet timetables, standards of service above minimum levels of safety required in law. The island's connectivity is entirely at the discretion of the firms, who are answerable and indeed overwhelmingly driven by the needs of their shareholders. So no public service obligation, no regulator, and they set their own service standards. On the point of a regulator, the Minister should know that I'm having a bill written currently for a ferries regulator for the United Kingdom. And these ferry firms, they change their speeds and timetables whenever they want, and they judge their own punctuality rates dependent on the service that they want to run, not one that we agree that they should run. Second, the firm's corporate structures and incredibly inflated valuations are becoming a critical issue for the island, and I also believe that they are bad for the United Kingdom. What do I mean by that? The Solent market has an established model of private equity style ownership, which has several generations of sales, acquisition and sale. And all that time, debt has gone up. So the island is a captured market. We have no choice but to use the firms. They have reliable high incomes. There are high barriers to market entry. They are highly profitable. This makes them ideal for private equity investment. Typically, owners purchase the firms with borrowed money. The ferry firms are subsequently restructured to pay interest on this debt. They effectively avoid tax perfectly legally because they pay back their shareholders through loans. So we, the users, pay for the owner's purchase of the firms, which we then pay through the nose to pay their interest on. So returns to shareholders are via loans to debt, loans on the debt. And whilst this may be common elsewhere, it is sadly used by the water utilities, and that's not a great example of this private equity style structures. Those firms have a utilities regulator where the ferry firms that are also using this private equity style structures do not have any regulator to control them or to put limits on debt or limits or demands on service. The firms have been increasingly overvalued by bankers with a vested interest in ramping up their value. And the higher the value of the initial purchase, the greater the debt which is loaded onto the firm and the greater the need to repay that interest. The more that islanders, to put it bluntly, get stuffed by these ferry firms, and the more that we have to pay through the nose to pay back the interest to buy the firms in the first place. I think Manchester United had a similar form of ownership, as I say, and the water utilities, but the water utilities have a regulator that makes demands on those firms. So, for example, looking at Whitelink for the year ending 2023, tangible assets of 85 million, operating profit of 15 million. Now, I know that my right honourable friend, the Minister, has a distinguished expertise in matters of transport, and he will know the operating margins for the rail firms. I'm just looking at the operating margins for the ferries in the last 20 years. So in 1990, operating margin 28%, 95, 19%, 2000, operating margin 32%. 29% in 2004, 20% in 2010, and 2019, 25%. Red Funnel, over the years, from 1990, 15%, 95, 21%, 1990, 24%. These are vast operating margins, profit margins that these companies have. And when you compare that to the rail firms, what is it, 2%, 5% maximum? There is a real ethical problem here with the amount of profit these people are making, the amount of tax they pay on that, which is very low. And effectively, since the early 2000s, and I don't know why we have allowed them to get away with it, the Isle of Wight ferries have been treated as collateral for loans for private equity and for pension funds. Not only that, but if you look at there's a web of sort of offshore companies that own both the firms, and in Whitelink's parent company, Arca Topco, had borrowings, and I find it unbelievable, this amount, of £261,593,000. A small ferry firm has borrowings of over a quarter, or loans outstanding of over $250 million. That is a phenomenal amount. Some of that is in terms of investment, but most of that is debt that has been loaded onto those firms over the years by pension funds, by private equity, in order to buy these firms. Arco Topco paid interest totaling 16,825,000. And various people that have owned this company or been paid back those loans have included Basalt Infrastructure, Fiera Infrastructure, and amazingly, the People's Bank of China. The People's Bank of China, an arm of the Chinese Communist Party, has owned the company that owned the Isle of Wight ferry. Effectively, these companies, and I'm going to say one more thing about Whitelink first. Whitelink argue they make no profit because they use loans to invest in the company. And whilst that is not wholly untrue, because they do use some of those loans to buy new things and to make investment, although nothing like enough, both of them, that is also largely dishonest. Because those loans are not used to invest in the company, those loans are used to pay back the massive amounts of debt that are loaded onto these firms, which is why islanders are being screwed, to put it in the vernacular. I apologise for my bad language, Madam Chairman, every time they use the firms. That is the problem here. And on this issue, I personally feel I've been lied to about the debt and about the ownership structure by both firms for too long. And frankly, my tolerance of them is really reaching a low point. So these firms have become overvalued cash cows. Red Funnel, the last time it was sold, I think it was 370 million. So in 2007, it was worth 200 million. 10 years later, it was worth 370 million. Phenomenally overvalued. And I suspect they were always going to have trouble paying back the loans for that overvaluation. But since COVID, their passenger market has dropped 30%. So what are they doing? They're cutting back on their services, and I'll come to that in a minute. But effectively, they're overvalued cash cows. And because these cash cows are not delivering, we, the passengers, are being squeezed more. So to deliver the returns they need on their inflated prices, on their inflated valuations, they've cut back services. So services are fewer. For any given Monday in February, Whitelink 2004 compared to now, reduced sailings from Fishbourne from 36 a day to 18 a day. Reduced sailings from Yarmouth from 24 a day to 16 a day. Reduced sailings from Ryde from 32 sailings a day to 18 a day. So they're cutting back significantly on services in order to increase their profits. Red Funnel reduced sailings from West Cowes from 30 sailings to 22 sailings between 1998 and now. And although Red Funnel say they have increased sailings on their car ferry from 13 to 14, the number of unrestricted sailings has stayed the same. Services are also slower. Redjet used to take 22 minutes. It now takes 28. And what that means, and the Minister should know this, is there now is a slip service. So instead of going every half an hour during peak periods, it goes effectively, there's a delay of 10 minutes on it every time. And that is really messing up people's connectivity with the mainland, getting trains or buses to different places. And before 2009, Whitelink Fastcats had a reported maximum speed of 34 knots. Today it's 26. Late night services are also being cut. Red Funnel has just cut its the late night service between Cowes and Southampton. Whitelink, to their credit, has put one back on, but it was painful to get them to do it. Next, on this point, yield management pricing, which again, because the Minister is very expert in these things, he knows what it is. You go online, you look for a flight to, I don't know, Cairo, Ibiza, Paris, wherever, and you get different pricing because that's the way that yield management pricing schemes work. If you go and do it in advance, it becomes cheaper, etc., etc. For stuff like air travel, that works, but on monopolies, it doesn't. And whilst the firms say, we've still got starting prices for a car with a family for £29, because of their surge pricing, the amount of tickets in that bracket are tiny, if not non-existent. And there are something between 13 and 16 price brackets. And the fact that you go onto these ferries, to book a ferry at a bank holiday or to book a ferry in summer at a week's notice, and it's £250 return, there are huge numbers of tickets available at the most expensive, the most rip-off prices, and virtually none at the cheaper rates. So it is my concern that this form of surge pricing is hiding significant inflation in the value of, in the cost of actually travelling. And it's having a significant effect on our economy. What else? So why change now? I'm going to wrap up in the next 5 to 6 minutes. I'm really going to rattle through this. Why change now? Because they've got old car ferries, because they spent too long paying back shareholders and not enough time investing. And if they want green money from the government, that should come at a price. Secondly, the Islands Forum initiative, which I and the Scottish councils lobbied for. The government is now looking into connectivity between the mainland and the UK islands. Thirdly, during the COVID pandemic, the ferries took money from the government because they recognised they ran a lifeline service. Fourth, because Red Funnel is probably up for sale again. And I'm worried that eventually one of these firms is going to be so overloaded with debt that it falls over. Fifth, there may be an attempt by a local entrepreneur, Nick Wakefield, to introduce a public service ferry service, which I believe the government should be supporting, because that will help break the monopoly of Red Funnel and Whitelink, and it will break the monopoly of this corrupted private equity-style investment system. So out of the many questions that I want the department to answer, and I will follow up with letters if we don't get through all the answers today, does the DfT have an opinion on supporting new ferry firms? Does it really believe, given the state of the private equity style investment, that this is a healthy market and a healthy structure for new duopolies and monopolies? There's a rail bill coming up, which the Minister, I'm sure, knows about. Can we add the Isle of Wight ferries to it as well? On the sale of Red Funnel, what powers does the government have to block a sale? What powers do we have to prevent them selling their third passenger ferry? If they're running if they're running a comprehensive service on 2 passenger ferries, even slowing them down to save money, which is what they're doing, if one of those ferries falls over, or both of them, there will be no service. How does the government feel about that? Next, what's my answer? Easier multi-link tickets for poorer islanders, a greater discount for journeys starting on the island, electronic through ticketing. We still don't have electronic through ticketing. I mean, it's ridiculous. The ability to book faces for passengers, the elderly or those going for medical treatment, independent assessment of punctuality and reliability, permanent improvements in late and early passenger services so the ferries understand they have a public service obligation, regular services, not the unacceptable slip service that Red Funnel is running to save money, a duty to ensure best connectivity with the national rail services. I'm bored of having to lecture them to do so. Stronger sanctions for failures to deliver an agreed standard of service. If he's coming back with his family and he was living on the Isle of Wight, a couple of weeks ago, the ferry firm just didn't run the last service. He's stuck in a hotel, it's cost him 300 quid. Does he think that he should be paying, or does he think actually no, he should be able to claim that back from Whitelink or Red Funnel the next time that happens? Completely unacceptable. An accurate understanding of investment levels in recent years, a better deal for young people, better wheelchair and disabled access, more transparency over corporate structures, thought given to whether the Isle of Wight should be taking a seat on the board of the major ferry firms. I'm happy to discuss nationalisation. I can't see it being on the cards. It hasn't been under any government, including Labour, in the past. But what happens when these firms have debts that become unmanageable? So what are the options for getting there? I'm having an independent regulator bill written. Would the government consider supporting that and installing a regulator, not only for the Solent ferries, but for all the national ferry firms? I've had to do a national bill, just for islanders watching this, because if I bring in a Solent bill alone, I, as an MP, cannot then present it. So the parliamentary etiquette is I can only present a bill when it's a national bill, and therefore I'm presenting a ferries regulator UK bill rather than just for the Solent. So that's the first point. Secondly, would you demand the rights to sign off on their timetables like you do for the rail services? I'm talking about collectively you, not the individual minister, clearly. Is there more money for central government funding for healthcare-related visits to the island? Might we persuade the companies to enter into voluntary regulation where there is a formal process, where they have to listen to us more seriously? So giving our Transport Infrastructure Board beefed up powers, maybe legal powers, to demand better things. I'm going to be writing to the Competition Authority to see what scope there is, whether I can bring in a request for an inquiry into the ferries, how this can be initiated. Will the Department of Transport support my request? We cannot go on as we are at the moment. And despite having some incremental gains over the last few years, we are now reaching a crunch point where these firms are so overvalued, where their shareholders' demands for returns are so loud that we simply don't get listened to. And it is harming our future. Whether it's the fact that our tourist bookings are down, or whether it's the fact that if you're a young islander, you can't go to Southampton in the evening because there's no way back. And okay, you go and get a car ferry from Portsmouth, but it goes from a different place from when you left. Summing up, and I thank the Minister for bearing with me. I know this isn't his responsibility per se, because the relevant minister is in the House of Lords, so I'm sorry to be unloading on him. The ferry companies are failing the island because the private equity model is now breaking down. The disparity between the power of the shareholders and the needs of the island are becoming too great, and the situation is becoming acute. Shareholders are relentlessly prioritised over the needs of the island. Sailings are fewer, slower, and more expensive than they were 20 years ago. The firms have no obligation to run a service. And when I say to them, this is one of the things that really grips me, Madam Chairman. When I say to the firms, shouldn't you be raising your game? Their attitude is, if you complain too loudly, we won't invest. It is literally a form of blackmail for a genuine lifeline service. That if we dare criticise them, they may think about their investment plans. If we criticise them and they think about their investment plans and say, we don't know if we're going to invest, that is reason for the government to give them an enormous kick up the backside and say, if that's the way you play it, we will force regulation on you to make sure that you are forced to be considerate, that you are forced to be thoughtful, and if you say you're running a service, then damn well run a service and not just change your timetable when you fancy slowing down your boats to save some money to pay your shareholders over the needs of the Isle of Wight. So as you can see, this is an issue that grips me because it is harming the people of the island, and we need change. And I'm really hoping that the Minister now will work with me, because there is a window of opportunity when it comes to green funding for the ferries, when it comes to the island connectivity because of the Islands Forum, when it comes to potentially ferries clauses in the rail bill for change, whether that is voluntary change from the ferries or whether that is change that we encourage or force on them. But I do think the time is now to look again at this, because we can't have another 20 years of this. Thank you.
This House has considered government support for cross-Solent ferry transport. Minister.
Well, let me begin by saying that it's my pleasure today to serve under your chairmanship, Mrs Latham, and I'm delighted to be standing in for the Maritime Minister today, who cannot attend as he sits in the other House, as my honourable friend, the member for the Isle of Wight, has pointed out. And I'd like to congratulate my honourable friend on securing this debate that we have this afternoon. I know that this is an incredibly important topic to both him and the community that he represents. The ferry service is essential for the island, for the islanders and visitors, and he has been championing this important link for many years, campaigning for a more resilient and reliable service for his constituents. And I know his recent plan for the future of cross-Solent ferries, which I have in my hand, is a culmination of all of his hard work, offering a route map towards better services, better pricing and ticketing, and greater transparency over the ownership structures of ferry operators. I can assure him that the Department for Transport will take time to thoroughly digest the report, and we will respond to all of the questions he has asked of me this afternoon. So for now, I will simply say that we welcome this work, and we look forward to seeing the final report once both his constituents and the Isle of Wight Council have had the opportunity to comment, which he is, of course, giving them in the consultation. That consultation is important because, as we have always made clear, the solutions to these issues are better resolved at a local level, where all stakeholders, so islanders, the operators and the council, can get round the table and, if possible, agree the best way forward. The government has a history of backing reliable and accessible ferry services for the Isle of Wight. During the pandemic, cross-Solent ferry services were safeguarded, with significant funds being made available to the Isle of Wight Council to ensure they were preserved. An excellent example of the council and operators coming together to tackle the challenges faced at that time. However, as my honourable friend is aware, whilst that intervention highlighted the government's high regard of lifeline ferry links, it was made under those exceptional circumstances. And as the country moves from recovery to renewal, we must acknowledge that the current operators of cross-Solent services do so in a fully commercial market. That means the bar for central government intervention in such a commercial market is rightly extremely high, albeit I'm aware that he is asking us to meet that height. The economic growth we are striving for relies on a healthy private sector that brings jobs, investment and opportunities to communities up and down the country. We must acknowledge that these ferry operators are part of that ecosystem. The government prides itself on recognising the benefits of private investment, and we have worked hard to ensure that UK PLC is an attractive place to do business. This means that when local issues arise around local services, then locally led solutions are the best way to resolve them, and it's again why I commend my honourable friend for the report that he has produced. The Isle of Wight Transport Infrastructure Body could well be the perfect vehicle for these discussions, and I hope my honourable friend reaches out to them as part of his consultation. We should not forget that the investigation into the Isle of Wight ferry market by the then Office of Fair Trading back in 2009 was instigated by the then local MP working with his constituents. Yet another example of this community coming together to drive action. And of course, as my honourable friend sets out today, the services are not perfect, and we can all acknowledge that there's work to be done. This was highlighted by the disruption to Red Funnel services last week, which saw many passengers endure frustrating delays. And I think we can all agree that the situation was not acceptable, and whilst we thank Red Funnel for the mitigations put in place, they do not take away from the impact those cancellations had on the islanders. The government welcomes the independent review Red Funnel are conducting, and I know once it's complete that the Maritime Minister will be meeting with them to discuss the recommendations. To conclude, I'd like to thank, by closing, with my thanks to my honourable friend, the member for the Isle of Wight, for securing this debate. He has expertly pressed home both his concerns and the concerns of his constituents, and he's taken time to put them together in a report and put that report out to consultation. I'd like to thank him for his engagement on these important issues and to underline that he has the government's full support in striving for the quality of service that his community deserves.
House has considered government support for cross-Solent ferry transport. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Order, order. Hugh, I've sent you that. Order. Mr Desi to move the motion.
Thank you very much, Mrs Latham, and it is a pleasure to serve under your chairship. And I beg to move that this House has considered personal independence payments and other disability benefits. I'm very grateful, Ms Latham, to the House authorities, in particular for allowing me to secure this important debate, because it is an issue of huge concern to many across our country, including in my Slough constituency, where often constituents have come to me to meet me at my advice surgeries with tears streaming down their eyes in absolute despair at the predicament that they are facing, especially as they are struggling to make ends meet in the midst of a cost of living crisis. This evening I'll stand before this House to draw attention to the state of disability benefits in our nation, those in our society with disabilities and other health conditions which often prevent them from working are valuable members of our society. They cannot be summarised by statistics nor by how much they cost the public purse. Behind every figure, Mrs Latham, is a disabled person. Successive Conservative governments have again and again undermined social security in our country, whether it be through cutting support, a punitive culture towards disabled applicants, or perhaps most disappointingly, divisive rhetoric about the most vulnerable in our society from none other than senior government ministers. It is my belief, Mrs Latham, that how the most vulnerable are treated is a benchmark of how healthy our society is. I'm proud to say that under a Labour government, every stage of the social security system will be supportive and accessible. Labour understands the importance of every person with disabilities being treated with the respect and dignity that they deserve. Unfortunately, this isn't a view which is shared by everyone in our society. Under the Conservatives, many disabled people feel that the DWP is failing them with an assessment process which does not understand their needs. My Slough constituent, Monica, yes, I will give way.
He's making a powerful speech about a very important subject. In fact, Eleanor, one of my constituents, got in touch with me recently. She had a young child and was pregnant and reassessed. Her money was dropped. She found out just before she had her second child. And then the money was reinstated at appeal. Does he agree with me that the assessment process is mad at the moment? It's crazy, it's not sensible, and we need to change it, and fast?
I thank my honourable friend for making the case for Eleanor in her constituency. Indeed, she is a strong champion of her constituents, and no doubt she, along with other right honourable members of this place, will have helped constituents regain thousands of pounds worth of support that they are duly due. I do agree with her that the assessment process is something that does need to be looked at, and I hope that the Minister will give us some good news at the end of this debate. Yes, I will give way to my honourable friend.
And also, I congratulate him on gaining this speech. We've had some tragic cases in recent years, unfortunately, including people who have gone through the transition from DLA to PIP. And one person in particular sticks in my mind, Philippa Day, who died. She took her own life because of the transition process and how appalling that was and the mistakes that were made there. We need to make sure that we have policies and systems in place for our health assessments and elsewhere that protect vulnerable people, that don't actually make it worse. I'm sure he agrees with that.
I thank my honourable friend, and indeed she speaks with a great deal of experience, having served previously as a Shadow Secretary of State, and indeed the word there is tragedy. There have been countless tragedies, and that is why the likes of myself have been calling upon the government to deal with issues with compassion, with empathy, because these are real people that we are talking about, and often they have, unfortunately, lost their lives, or they have been put in a state of such despair that they do not know how to get out of their predicament. Indeed, my Slough constituent, Monica, told me about her struggles being assessed for PIP. Monica was informed, Mrs. Latham, that she was required to have a health assessment in relation to extending her PIP. After appealing against 27 pages of discrepancies and outright untruths in the report from her previous assessment, she was predictably very worried about how she would get through things and about going through this again. Her assessment ended up being delayed for a month and taking place when she was suffering particularly ill health. Monica was again left in the lurch by the DWP and left facing another appeal, which she is now dreading. Stories like Monica's, unfortunately, aren't news to any of us, as my honourable friends have already eloquently explained. We all have constituents who are failed by the system and the DWP. Labour has a plan, Mrs. Latham, to replace the government's current flawed system of work capability assessments with a system that can support people to live with security. Many benefit claimants are aspirational, but also fearful that if they go back into work and they find themselves unable to cope, that they will be left high and dry, assessed as being able to work, but finding themselves unable to work full-time. Labour's plan was born out of a desire to deliver for disabled people, helping those who can work back into work. Too many disabled people, Ms. Latham, say the current system doesn't work for them. Labour has pledged that it will introduce the Into Work Guarantee, which I hope the Shadow Minister will explain at length, because that, I feel, allows claimants to agree with their benefits advisor that if they try paid work and it doesn't work out, within a period of a year that they can go back to the exact benefits that they were on without fresh health assessments. With 288,000 PIP claims outstanding, Mrs. Latham, in October 2023, does the Minister agree that Labour's plan will help to reduce the number of disabled people who want to work but don't want to risk having their benefits reassessed? In January, Mrs. Latham, of this year, the latest statistics from the House of Commons Library found that the most common main disabling condition amongst claimants of PIP were psychiatric disorders. Nationwide, 37.7% of PIP claims were due to this, with mental health waiting lists ballooning under the Conservatives. This is unfortunately not a surprising statistic. When the government leaves suffering people far too long, people who often see their condition worsen before being able to access treatment, it's no wonder this number is so unacceptably high. I believe that this begs the question, will the Minister admit that her party's policies on mental health over the past 14 years have significantly contributed to the PIP backlog? The latest numbers from Macmillan Cancer Support, Mrs. Latham, found that claimants are still waiting 15 weeks on average for their PIP claim to be processed. Unacceptably, this is higher than it was at the same time last year, with 4 in 5 people living with cancer facing an increased financial impact from their diagnosis, even before the pandemic and the cost of living crisis. It is now unacceptable that the government has failed to fix these issues, which affect our constituents at some of the most difficult periods in their lives. The government announced extra funding for processing disability claims in the budget, but can the Minister clarify how exactly this will be used to reduce delays? Now, Mrs. Latham, among PIP claimants in my Slough constituency, 16.3% of them are due to musculoskeletal disorders. The MS Society's research found it evident that our current disability assessment system is not fit for purpose for those living with multiple sclerosis, a condition that significantly varies in its impact from day to day. A staggering 3 in 5 people with MS have reported being unable to adequately explain the effects of their condition on the standard application form. This highlights a systemic failure to capture the true extent of disabilities that are not constant but fluctuate, underscoring this government's failure to create a nuanced system which understands the lived realities of those with MS and other conditions. Furthermore, the MS Society's findings urge the government to consider the elimination of the 20-metre rule used in mobility assessments and to seek a more flexible approach that accurately reflects the variable nature of MS. Current criteria fail to accommodate the day-to-day changes in symptoms that people with MS experience. On one day, walking 20 metres is achievable. On others, it is downright impossible. This clearly leads, Mrs. Latham, to assessments that do not reflect disabled people's actual needs. Incorporating these changes into our approach to disability benefits would not only make the system fairer, but also ensure that individuals with MS and similar fluctuating conditions receive the support that they truly need. I'm proud that Labour is committed to delivering a system which works for disabled people, ensuring that every person with a disability receives the respect, support and dignity that they deserve. In conclusion, Ms. Latham, I would like to thank the various constituents who have come to me and who have asked me to share their stories. I'm grateful also to the various voluntary organisations who make such an enormous impact to help those in dire need. And as we conclude this debate on personal independence payments and other disability benefits, let us remember the very essence of what we're discussing today, the lives and well-being of some of the most vulnerable members of our society. The accounts we've heard serve as a stark reminder of the critical work that lies ahead. It is evident that our current system, in its rigidity and lack of understanding, falls short of providing the necessary support to those living with conditions like MS. The call to reform, to dismantle barriers such as the 20-metre rule and to embrace a more nuanced approach to disability assessment is more than just policy revision. It's a moral imperative. We stand, Mrs. Latham, at a crossroads when the choices we make can significantly enhance the lives of thousands. By advocating for a system that truly understands the variable and complex nature of disabilities, we advocate for a society that places dignity, empathy, and support at its very heart. This is not just about adjusting guidelines or streamlining processes. It's about ensuring that every individual feels seen, heard, and valued. Our commitment to reforming PIP and other disability benefits is a testament to our dedication to justice and equity for all citizens, regardless of their physical or mental health challenges. Let us leave this chamber, Mrs. Latham, with a renewed dedication to serve those within our constituency and beyond, ready to enact the changes necessary for a fairer, more compassionate benefits system. Together, we have the power to transform lives. Let that be our guiding principle in the days ahead. Thank you very much.
They want to be called in this debate. The question is that this House has considered personal independence payment and other disability benefits. John McDonnell.
I'll try and be brief as possible so others can come in. I just want to make one specific point before I come on to the general point to reinforce what my honourable friend has said. On this specific point, I'm a champion for Action for ME, the myalgic encephalomyelitis campaign. They've written to a number of us, I believe, who've emphasised the concerns that they've got with regard to the PIP assessments and how narrow it is, and as a result of that, sufferers on ME They're simply asking for the Minister to commit to what the previous Minister was, which was to meet with them so that they can work and co-produce a system to enable them to have full access. I dealt with the first ME case about 25 years ago, and it was then when it was refused to be recognised. There was a lot of stigma attached to it. These people have been sufferers in the quiet now, and I think it does behove the government now to sit down with this group and work through the process from here on in. I want to take up where my honourable friend has left off with regard to the impact that this system has on individuals at the moment. Some who were at the Select Committee may recall the evidence that was provided with regard to Michael O'Harlan. Michael O'Harlan was a case I dealt with 10 years ago. I met his family, the lovely Anne-Marie and Declan. He was a person who had suffered mental health difficulties, had attempted suicide already, then was assessed, declared fit for work and couldn't cope with it, and then committed suicide. That was 10 years ago. John Pring, some of you will know from the Disability News Service, does an excellent role in monitoring cases and providing information to many of us. And he's been monitoring recent cases, particularly in relation to people coming under pressure with regard to universal credit and seeking to apply. And it just gave 3 examples in this last couple of years, really. I'll just give you brief details on them. I won't use any names. A disabled woman left traumatised by daily demands of universal credit took her own life. Days earlier, she'd been told she would need to attend a face-to-face meeting with a work coach. She'd shake and cry every time she had to log onto a universal credit journal, which she had to do every weekday to check whether she'd received instructions and avoided a sanction. She'd already had a 6-month sick note from her doctor explaining she was not fit to work, but she was expected to go through the whole process itself, and she couldn't cope with it. The DWP were told about her mental distress. They were told about her suicidal thoughts and the fear of the department. She took her own life. There was another suicide just months after that. Someone who had a long history of depression and anxiety had been engaging with mental health services. He'd been detained under the Mental Health Act. He was then discharged. A psychiatrist saw him on 2 days before he took his own life, and he told the inquest that psychiatrist said he believed the anxiety had been exacerbated by the whole process of the universal credit applications itself. Another one, 2023, died a month after taking an overdose that caused irreversible damage to her liver. The coroner didn't believe she intended to take her own life, but nevertheless the coroner wrote a prevention of harm report to the DWP, highlighting how the DWP itself had failed in its duty to maintain protection. The reason I raise these is because John Pring and others had to go to a Freedom of Information access point. He took a Freedom of Information Act to get a report that was produced by the Prime Minister's Information Unit on the very issue of the harm caused by this process and the suicides that were taking place. It was 4 years before that report was produced. It had been covered up within the PMIU and prevented from publication itself. That report, actually, a number of us had been calling for on the floor of the House of Commons and been denied access to it. And the reason we were calling for it, because in the report there were certain recommendations being made about the duty of care that the department had to these particular people when they were identified as vulnerable, and certain specific actions were needed to be put in place. I believe there's a further reports that, again, I believe should be produced, and there should be full openness and transparency on all of this. I commend DPAC, Disabled People Against the Cuts, have been running a campaign year in, year out about this issue, basically saying when it comes to disability benefits for PIP, the work capability assessment, the application process on the universal credit, the pressures that people put under, it's putting lives at risk. And what Anne-Marie called for, which I think is right now, we need a statutory duty of care placed upon the department with regard to vulnerable people in particular. And actually, on the level of harm that's been done by the department, I do believe now also, I agree with Anne-Marie and others, that there should be an independent public inquiry into the harm that's been created, certainly over the last 14 years, by the brutal way in which benefits have been administered, particularly those who are particularly vulnerable with mental health problems.
Have to reduce the time to no more than 5 minutes each speech. Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, can I thank the Honourable Gentleman for Slough for his persistent and thorough questioning of DWP on matters pertaining to disability benefits. I support him in debates in this hall and in the chamber as well, and he's been I use the word, it's often used, but it's good to have at this side of the chamber a champion, and his work has been excellent. There will not be one of us engaged member of this House who does not have an awful story of someone turned down for help when they're so much in need of it. I have a constituent now, I'm not going to mention his name, I'm just going to tell a story, who currently is a plasterer. He's 50 years of age. He had many years of work ahead of him, and as someone who's good at his job, he is never out of work because he's always done a good job all his life. This was his plan. However, the reality that he's had a number of strokes, been in the intensive care unit, has been told he will never regain strength enough to work and will struggle with daily life. His wife is a care assistant in a special needs school, and she's been able to help him in many ways he never dreamed of, that he would ever need that sort of help. And yet he has been turned down for PIP's, personal independence payment. For the life of me, Madam Chair, I cannot understand how someone who needs help for daily care by his wife, his mother-in-law and daughter has been given no points in that assessment. The system has clearly let him down. And I can see the difference because I know the guy. I knew him all my life, or all his life, I should say. Now, my staff will, of course, assist him in his appeal. But I always thought, Madam Chair, that the idea of the benefit system is to help those in need. Now, the Honourable Gentleman who spoke before me, Hayden Harrington, referred to the people who need help. And it really depresses me when you look at this. Indeed, the recent Supreme Court judgment has shown that assessments have not been carried out in the correct way, meaning that 250,000 cases are to be reopened, to ascertain that the correct assessment criteria was used. And speaking as someone, and I do this, it's not a boast, Madam Chair, I fill in forms regularly for people in benefits, and I know the system fairly well. I have a staff member who does nothing else but look after benefit queries, so we're in the front line when it comes to that. She's incredibly overworked. It is clear to me that the criteria has never followed the spirit of the law. The spirit is to ensure that those who need help with their daily lives can get that help. The reality has been incredibly ill people being made to feel like liars or spongers or fakers, made to feel that they have no right to help and that the world judges them. From cancer patients of grown men, examples again, who require their wife to now catheterise them multiple times during the day, to those who are severely impacted by lifelong learning difficulties, been forced to have their awards renewed and their routines disrupted with assessments. This system lets people down regularly, and it needs to be changed. It needs to understand with compassion the issues for my constituents and other constituents who have spoken and who will speak after. Yes, we need to ensure that those claiming are entitled to the system. I understand that. But the way this is assessed needs to change, and change now. So, Minister, we say this beseechingly, we say it with honesty, and we do it because we do it on behalf of my constituents and on behalf of others as well, to ascertain how quickly these changes can be made so that men like my constituent who feels worthless and embarrassed to claim, only to be told they aren't deserving of help, will actually be assessed on their need, the need that they have now. It's not the grown man that he was 10 years ago or 5 years ago. It's the man he is today, the man who needs that care and mobility through his whole life. And when I look back, and this gentleman that I give the example at the beginning, he's worked for every 34 years of his life in a very physically demanding job. And whenever he needs help, he needs a social welfare system that does the job, delivers for them when they have a dire need, and the health changes in their personal life. So today's debate is so important, Madam Chair. It's a debate we need. We need to have an assessment that takes in the health conditions that they have, that understands with compassion why they need help, that the evidential base from their doctors, from their medical experts, from their wife, from their carers, from their mother-in-law, from their daughter. All that is the evidential base that we need, and I can't really for the life of me understand why it isn't taken on board.
The recent work of the Select Committee. Firstly, that these PIP assessments should routinely be recorded, because we know the assessments very often go wrong. We've heard lots of examples of that already. We don't know why. They should routinely be recorded with an opt-out available for the claimants who don't want a recording to be taken. All the providers agree with that proposal. For some reason, the government will not accept it. The minister's predecessor gave a number of reasons, all of which are valid, but they're all surmountable. By not recording the assessments, we just don't know what's going on, and the problems just carry on, and they're not going to be fixed. Secondly, about the amount of cash that's provided in PIP. PIP is designed to cover the extra costs arising from people's disabilities. Of course, the amounts will vary from one person to another, but the New Economics Foundation told the recent inquiry of the Select Committee on Benefit Levels that on average PIP covers only just over a third of the additional income a disabled person required to afford a decent standard of living. Now, I welcome that the government has committed in its Disability Action Plan last month to set up an extra cost task force to make an assessment of what those extra costs actually are. I wonder if the Minister in winding up can tell us when that task force will start its work. One sort of practical proposition would be to increase the number of levels in PIP. There were more in DLA. We've got to increase the number of levels so that a better proxy for people's extra costs could be provided.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to join this debate, and I pay tribute for securing this debate. Some really important points have been made by all of the speakers, though, as is often the case, the many different strands get mixed up with a confusion between the WCA, PIP, access to work support. And that's not a criticism, it is because it is a very complicated system. And before universal credit was rolled out, we would see typically £2.7 billion worth of benefits that people were entitled to, often some of the most vulnerable people in society, missing out because the system was far too complex and you frankly needed a nuclear physics degree to be able to get that. There was around about 700,000 families who were missing out on the support that we all agreed they should be getting. And I recognise there are real challenges, and that's why this debate is important. That is why the Minister is here today and was also at the Select Committee this morning, a busy day. But I do welcome the fact that in real terms we've increased the support to people with disabilities and long-term health conditions by £11.3 billion, that we must not lose sight of the fact that both PIP and WCA, which we're talking about predominantly today, were both introduced by the former Labour government. And I want to pay tribute to all of the stakeholders, the independent reviews that have taken place to deliver hundreds and hundreds of improvements that have made a difference, but there is still a considerable way to go. But we've seen under the old system, just 16% of claimants got the highest level of support. It was 32% a couple of years ago, and I imagine that has continued to increase. On mental health in particular, you are now 6 times more likely in PIP to get the highest level of support than you were under DLA, where that was often recognised in the system, and we can all celebrate record disability employment. But to make improvements, I have a few asks or updates that I would like from the Minister. First of all, and it's my apologies, I did at oral questions, I asked a question, but I don't think I was very clear because I got a different answer back. I keep asking around about when somebody has been assessed for PIP, they get a level of financial support, so we can debate whether that's enough or not. But we do nothing else. So if we identify somebody who has a primary health condition, we never signpost them to the local support, whether that's formal or informal in their local area. We all know in our constituencies of different groups that support people, but often those that would benefit from that most are unaware of that. Secondly, has there been any progress around mandatory reconsiderations? We did a pilot where we proactively reached out to the claimants, asked in their own words why they were challenging the decision, which more often than not was because they were unable to get the supportive evidence from their GP or whoever, and then we would assist in securing that. Has that progressed? Is it still double? Is it higher? Because that was certainly an area we thought would make a significant difference. COVID fast-tracked our use of telephone and video assessments. We were looking at piloting and testing them and introducing them over a decade. We had to introduce them over days. And stakeholders warmly welcomed them, and it allowed people not to have to necessarily travel to long distances to, in some cases, inappropriate assessment centres. But the other advantage is that because you were no longer tied to a geographical location, that you could, in theory, have your assessment with somebody with a specialist knowledge of your primary condition. Is that what is happening? And are stakeholders involved in the training and updating of the skill sets for those specialists who would recognise those? I was delighted that finally, and it nearly broke me when I was the Minister, that we got the Special Rules for Terminal Illness over the line. Is there an update on how that is working by matching the definitions under the NHS from taking it from 6 months to 1 year, so we remove the double assessments that was happening? And is there any progress with convincing Scotland that whilst they like to be different, often for the sake of being different, in this area they really should have mirrored what was our view, which was the one that was shaped by the stakeholders? And finally, for vulnerable claimants, and I pay tribute to the work of the Honourable Member for Oldham East, have we made any progress at the beginning of an application asking them to provide a named trusted colleague, so if they drop out or stop responding for whatever reason, we have a trusted point of contact so that we can say the claimant is no longer responding. Are you aware of an issue? Now, in most cases, that's because their circumstances have changed. But in the absolute worst cases, it would allow us to then be able to chase up support for them rather than them being left behind. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Latham. I want to congratulate my honourable friend from Slough for securing this crucially important debate. To boil this debate down to its essence, to boil down to the essence of the situation disabled people in our constituencies and across the country are facing, I think it can be summed up like this. Too often, disabled people are scapegoated. Too often, disabled people are treated like dirt. And disabled people aren't given, by the social security system, the financial support that they not only deserve, but they so fundamentally need. And that needs to change. Benefits are simply too low. The Select Committee, the Work and Pensions Select Committee, last week, as we've heard, published its report considering benefit levels for working age people and whether or not they're meeting the needs of claimants. And three things arising from that report that I think we need to look at very closely. Firstly, shortfalls in the support provided through health and disability benefits were found to have a negative physical and mental health impact on claimants, which in turn could actually affect their ability to work. Secondly, that the committee recommends that the DWP sets out a new benchmark for benefits, actually considering living costs. And thirdly, it suggests using the methodology in the Joseph Rowntree Foundation and Trussell Trust's Essentials Guarantee. And these charities estimate that universal credit will fall short by £30 each week of the money needed to survive, even after benefits are increased in April. In relation to the situation facing disabled people in our country, in our society, we need to look very closely at the breaches of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, because recently, during the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, on the 18th of March, the UN Committee on the Rights of Disabled People accused, I'm afraid, the UK government of demonising disabled people and treating them as, to quote, undeserving citizens by preparing to fund tax cuts through slashing disability benefits. And I will give way.
He's making a very important point, Mrs. Latham, and I have an example, unfortunately, of a constituent of mine who until 2016 was in receipt of disability living allowance, was then told to apply for PIP, was rejected, then overturned at tribunal, then at review was increased her payment, and is now in 2024 told that she was never entitled to it and is being pursued by the Department of Work and Pensions for £49,000.
That's an excellent example of the appalling situation that disabled people are put into by the current system, and we all see it in our constituency surgeries, as the member so eloquently articulated there. 2 points from the United Nations. The United Nations Special Rapporteurs described current UK policy and practice as a pervasive framework and rhetoric that devalues disabled people's lives, which tells disabled people that they're undeserving citizens and makes people feel like criminals, particularly those who are trying to access the social security system. The committee members also cited examples of how the government had continued to breach its obligations under the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, pointing to a benefit system that traumatised claimants and led to some, as we've heard, even taking their own lives, increasing rates of institutionalisation and a disproportionate number of disabled people who are now too poor to eat their own homes or buy food. And a survey by the disability charity Ewan's Guide found that 50% of respondents were concerned about their energy bills, while 51% were worried about grocery bills in this, one of the richest countries on earth. The government reported in the autumn budget that there would be a consultation on an energy social tariff, yet this consultation was quietly shelved. This social tariff would have helped financially vulnerable consumers and those disabled people with higher energy use, so we need to go back to that. So I'll just finish on this, Mrs. Latham. The way disabled people are treated in our country should shame us all. A real change in direction is needed. And what we must move completely against is what we see in much of the right-wing media, I'm afraid, which is a scapegoating and demonisation of disabled people. Disabled people deserve respect, they deserve support, they deserve a social security system that works for them, and we need to move forward in a way which is inclusive, empathetic, and supports everyone in our society, because after all, we're all equal. Thanks.
Pleasure to serve under your chairmanship for the first time. I want to thank the Honourable Member for Slough for bringing forward this really, really important debate. The entire rationale for PIP and other disability benefits is to create parity between disabled people and their non-disabled counterparts. And we all know this just isn't the case. SENS have called on the UK Government to increase PIP so that it truly reflects the extra costs disabled people feel and face, and to increase universal credit, ESA, so that disabled people can actually get the minimum living standards able. The Honourable Member for Leeds East actually referenced social energy tariff, and I hope he'll support my private member's bill in that end, because I'm not giving up on that either. But in the UK, the UK government continues to shortchange disabled community, and the Honourable Member for Leeds East has already been reading my speech, I think, because I was going to use the same quotes from the UN rapporteur, but I won't for case of brevity. But it's shaming on the UK that the rapporteur thinks this is how disabled people are treated by this government. And throughout my casework and my engagement with disabled people and organisations, I hear that all the time. Disabled people feel disrespected, devalued and demonised by this government and the UK media, and it is utterly shameful. 1 in 5 people in the UK have a disability, and we could all be disabled tomorrow. I think that's a point worth remembering, and it's about time they get the recognition and support they deserve. We don't even have a disabilities minister. This argument has been raised many times, and I say to the Minister, this is no disrespect to her, but we do need a disabled minister focusing on this particular part of the portfolio. There's so little trust between the disabled community and the DWP, and with good reason. According to Z2K, since the introduction of PIP in 2013, 76% of claimants have ended up with a better outcome following an appeal, either by a lapse or an independent tribunal, and this compares to just 28% at mandatory reconsideration, where the DWP marked their own homework. This lack of trust with the DWP is why there's so much worry about the health and disability white paper proposals, and whilst the abolition of the work capability assessment is welcomed, it comes with grave risks. And it means that the much more high stakes for people, there's 500,000 people that are not well enough to work but aren't receiving PIP, and they're at risk losing out altogether. Therefore, it's imperative that the white paper proposals are halted until PIP can be trusted to reliably deliver the correct decisions. Since 2018, over 200,000 people have been awarded no PIP at the initial decision, but were then awarded some at the mandatory reconsideration or tribunal, with more than 70,000 of these cases subsequently receiving at least one higher or enhanced element. The system doesn't work. This is indicative of a system that isn't fit for purpose, forcing disabled people to endure gruelling assessments that have huge mental health impacts. It's about time the government started treating those with disabilities better. I had a constituent who was diagnosed with terminal cancer and with putting herself through gruelling trials. When she was reassessed for PIP, was more or less asked, "Oh, you're still alive. You're supposed to have died." The mental health impact on all disabled people undergoing this cannot be underestimated. And the Honourable Member and I'm so sorry, North Swindon, referenced the Scottish Government. That's why they started a system different from the one in Westminster, and it is based on fairness, dignity and respect. So they collect the information from doctors and others about the case for the individual who's claiming the adult disability payment. Isn't that a better way to do things? They have voiceability who help people fill in the forms correctly so that they get the right decision more often than not at the first point of contact. It really defies belief, and I've said this and I keep repeating it. Look at what's happening in Scotland. People who work for the Social Security Scotland, who have come from the DWP, actually say it's like night and day, the difference in how they have to treat clients, how they have to treat people, and how the system works. The Scottish Government have made a difference with interventions like the adult disability payment, child disability payment and carer support payment to ensure both disabled people and carers get all the financial support they are entitled to live with dignity. At my quarterly Poverty Action Network meetings, held the last one on Friday, there was a representative from the Scottish Social Security system there. They come every quarter and they're there to help local organisations who work in Motherwell and Wishaw to help improve lives for people. Will the Minister please look at what's happening in Scotland and reform this outdated, unworkable system?
To serve under your chairship, Mrs Latham. I congratulate the Honourable Member for Slough on securing this afternoon's debate. When he was a member of the Shadow Transport team, he joined me in meeting with disabled people to discuss accessibility, and I know that he continues to champion their rights in his constituency and beyond. He spoke passionately about the stories of people in tears from his constituency. And the Honourable Member for Newport West spoke of the challenges her constituent, Eleanor, faced when finding that her benefit was cut and then reinstated, and how this just caused multiple problems all the time. And my honourable friend for Oldham East and Saddleworth spoke about the consequences when an inhumane transfer from DLA to PIP, and how sadly Philippa Day took her own life because of this. As Shadow Minister for Disabled People, you won't be surprised to hear that PIP and other disability benefits are a regular feature of the conversations I have with disabled people, disabled people's organisations and charities. And I can assure you that even a brief mention of the word PIP assessment or work capability assessment is enough to strike genuine fear into the hearts of many. Disabled people tell me they feel demonised and humiliated by having to explain their conditions over and over again. And quite simply, as many have said, they do not trust the DWP to make the right decisions. And it's not difficult for me to see how we got to this point. Welfare reforms brought in during the coalition years, coupled with austerity, seem to have been based on the premise that disabled people are undeserving and out to defraud the system. And these moves, coupled with the fact that disabled people have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic and cost of living crisis, have led to a regression in disabled people's rights over the last 14 years. And that's not just my opinion, Chair. As the Honourable Member for Leeds so passionately put it, the UN agrees. I am ashamed to say that 8 years ago, the UK became the first country ever to have breached the UN Convention on the Rights of Disabled People. And as already been quoted, Rosemary Case, the committee chair, said, "We find a pervasive framework and rhetoric that devalues disabled people and undermines their human dignity. Reforms within social welfare benefits are premised on a notion that disabled people are undeserving and skiving off and defrauding the system. And this has resulted in hate speech and hostility towards disabled people. Put simply, the current system is flawed. And it's little wonder then that we see so many desperate constituents in our advice surgeries who are afraid the DWP will take away their income. Quite frankly, we should all be ashamed. And the Honourable Member for Hayes and Harlington asked the Minister to meet with the ME community to look at how we can reform the system. And I really hope that she remembers to respond to that point. I know that issues with the benefit system cannot be fixed overnight. But as the Honourable Member for East Ham said, yet again and again, I've heard him say this many times, why don't we just make sure that assessments are recorded as standard, a simple thing that can be done straight away? A future Labour government will provide a reliable safety net for people who lose their jobs or cannot work due to ill health or disability. Where appropriate, we will help people on their journey back into work by allowing them to try paid work without the need for reassessments if it does not work out. We will also replace the current system of work capability assessments with a system that supports people to live with dignity and security. In doing so, Labour will work with employers, trade unions and other stakeholders to support the well-being of workers and their long-term physical and mental health. Most importantly, Chair, a future Labour government is committed to working with disabled people to break down the barriers they face in everyday life. We know they are the experts by experience.
I'm grateful for the opportunity to close the debate today, and Mrs Latham, it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I'd like to thank all honourable members for their invaluable and insightful contributions this afternoon, and in particular the honourable gentleman from Slough for bringing this timely debate. Collaboration remains vital as we address the critical matters that we've discussed today, essential for supporting many in our communities. And I appreciate people are passionate, but the perception of a punitive, divisive culture and the rhetoric this afternoon is something that in my time doing this job and in my commitment to doing this role, and my honourable friend there from North Swindon, it's not an approach that we have taken taken or would ever take. And I would want anybody watching this debate this afternoon to feel reassured that whether they come to us through a complaints procedure or into an MP surgery or working with one of the charities in this area, that people will get the support that they need. And we at DWP, as much as anyone else, strive to give the most vulnerable the right support. We have the right policies and right system in place, that we can be fair to those in need, fair, of course, to the taxpayer, but always listening to disabled people's voices. And I've absolutely been striving to do that in this full-time role that I have here. I'm not going to disagree that I haven't looked at housing and youth alongside this as well, but much of this applies to disabled people as well. Those transitions and challenges are very much there to be seen. I'm very happy to meet with the Honourable Gentleman who he says needs to meet me from the ME community, so the Right Honourable Gentleman for Hayes and Harlington, very happy to do that. I'm also keen to look at Monica's case. We've heard of other cases this afternoon, the Honourable Member from Ceredigion. Please do share these cases with me. It's no good you only having them in your constituency realm. It's really important that we look at these and learn from these in terms of DWP, so that we can get beyond that perception and feel that people do have, and that I am determined to make sure that I do work and listen with disabled people about their everyday lives. I was recently in Hastings. Just one moment, I'll just finish this point and then I'll let the Honourable Lady come in, around our new trauma-informed approach. I'll be at the new Health Model Office in Gosport on Thursday, making sure that compassion, empathy and understanding is at the heart of what we do, of course.
I thank the Minister for giving way, and I'm grateful that she's offered for us all to be able to share all of our cases. I do hope the Minister realises how many, because some of us may be raising one or two cases in terms of examples, but I literally have hundreds and hundreds of cases in terms of where things have gone wrong.
Well, I'm very happy to look at these specific cases. I met with one of your Honourable Ladies' colleagues and with members from the blind community and people with visual impairment about how we can directly learn from their own experiences just recently, and the Honourable Gentleman from North Swindon made exactly that point. I've got a speech to make, but I do want to respond to some of the points. In terms of vulnerable people and vulnerable groups who are being who need specific support, please look at this morning's Select Committee, where safeguarding, I think, was very much covered by myself and our Minister for Lords, and where we have a vulnerable claimant champion and safeguarding concerns are rightly referred to social services. My honourable friend from North Swindon, I'm happy to write to him on the end of life point. The appointees point that he made, we covered once again this morning, and in recognition of the work we need to do to make sure that people have the suitable voice that they need, and there is progress in this area. And we are growing our visiting officers team up to 700 as we speak, to go out and support people in the way that he described, about making sure we go to the people we need to hear from. In terms of the mandatory reconsideration trial, it's too early for definitive results, but a very pertinent reminder for me to be dialed into that. In regard to the Chairman of the Select Committee asking around audio recording, we've taken an approach of an opt-in of audio recording, so I'm happy to again go away and look at that specifically, which he has indeed raised. Yeah, please do.
For those, whenever it comes to medical evidence has been presented, the Minister talked about compassion, but medical evidence is very clear what it says. Whenever the staff are looking at those matters and they see the medical evidence, can I ask very respectfully, are they trained to understand what that medical evidence is?
We've got a new Chief Medical Advisor and 4,000 clinicians in that area with statutory duty and understanding there, and that's very much some of the learnings that we've taken. So I hope that assures the Honourable Gentleman. If there's more to say, I will indeed write to him. But I think some questions have been raised about, how is the evidence looked at, how is it worked, and that I'm asking that myself individually as well. So I'm happy to continue to do that. Of course.
or picking up the point about default recording. Well, when she looks at that, I'm grateful to her offer to do that, will she bear in mind that all the providers, all the companies who provide these assessments favour default recording?
Well, I think the Honourable Gentleman, Right Honourable Gentleman, makes a good point because they want to get it right and they're keen to do what's right. So I'm very happy to look at that and feed back to him my thoughts and pick that up in the department under my tenure. And I think the reality is, Mrs Latham, we of course aim to make the right decision as early as possible. We recognise the numbers are high. And by the very nature, anybody who comes to a constituency surgery as MPs has invariably had a very poor experience. They wouldn't be with us otherwise. So that's why I want to take away those particular cases that have been raised to me today. However, they must be seen in the context of overall decisions. I'll come to the Honourable Gentleman shortly. PIP, 3 million decisions from October 2018 to September 2023. 8% appealed, 5% cleared at tribunal and 3% overturned. But I appreciate the Honourable Gentleman also made the point, and I'm very mindful of this. None of these are statistics. They are individual people with individual needs, and I think we should be very mindful of that. Happy to give way.
And given the time, I just wanted an answer to one of my various questions, which is that the government announced extra funding during the budget for processing disability claims. Can the Minister clarify exactly how this will be used to reduce the huge delays?
Yes, I'm keen to try and come on to that. There are many questions this afternoon. I'm trying to get to as many as I can. The Chance to Work guarantee was mentioned, which will effectively remove the work capability assessment for most claimants already assessed without work-related requirements, removing that fear of reassessment and giving the group the confidence to try work within the existing permitting work rules in employment support allowance and work allowance rules in universal credit. I'm absolutely delighted about what we've done around disability employment. I'm keen to say and do more around that, and I think that should feed in again to try to allay some of those concerns that's been raised this afternoon. The proportion of those in receipt of PIP with a mental health condition getting top rates is actually 6 times higher compared to DLA. PIP at 41% and DLA at 7%. And I would just like to point out the customer satisfaction of PIP customers was 77% in terms of satisfaction and different scores according to different providers, which again I'll go away and have a look at. So in terms of how people are dealt with dignity and satisfaction is extremely important to me. And indeed, I raised this morning, disability services complaints has decreased from 2,690 during the period 21-22 to 2,330 from 22 to 23. So I'm very mindful, again, all of that is about experience of individuals. Let me quickly just try and canter through a couple of other questions before I close. The Honourable Gentleman from Slough, when he talked about PIP clearance times as well, we've increased our number of case managers, health professional assessment providers to deal with the increased demand and taken in the blend of phone, video, face-to-face to make sure it's more service user-centred and that it's suitable. We've also empowered case managers where they have robust evidence to make decisions on award reviews without referral to an assessment provider, so decisions are quicker and we can avoid claims going out of payment. I'm very much looking at that individually myself and currently end-to-end claim process for new claims from 26 weeks has been reduced from August 2021 to a current 15 weeks wait. So we're in a better position than we were prior to the pandemic. It's an achievement that I'm proud of. Is there more to do? Absolutely yes. But again, I want those watching and listening to see that this is a big focus. So, Madam Chairman, I just want to say we are fully committed on delivering on the issues that matter to the British people. This is delivering for disabled people. It's an absolute mission for me in this role to make sure our most vulnerable members of society lead decent, fulfilling lives, and I'll use my time in this role to make sure I can make the changes that everybody would wish to see.
The question is that this House has considered personal independence payment and other disability benefits. No, there's not time. There is no time.
He's 40
As
seconds.
many as are of that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. I think nobody has it. Order, the sitting stands adjourned.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding